All right, hey everybody, welcome back. Tonight we're going to talk about wines of Spain, and this is for video 305, Wines of the World. Spain is one of my personal favorite wine countries to taste wine from. A very beautiful culture and just very fun just in general, right? So for tonight, we're going to have some fun facts. We're going to go over the regions and climates, the varieties, how to interpret labels, and the denominations and laws of wine in Spain, right? So Spain, long history, still has a current monarchy, right? One of the few places you can still see a king and queen. As far as the wine goes, very diverse, right? Here we have a picture of a porron. This is a wine decanter that's used in like celebrations or for fun dinners where you actually pour the wine directly in your mouth with this decanter. And one of the fun things to do traditionally is to hold it as far away from your face as possible while still pouring wine in your mouth. So needless to say, Spain knows how to party, right? So some fun facts to get us started tonight. Spain is actually the most mountainous region in Europe after Switzerland. They also contain the most acreage of vineyards planted in the world, but they rank third in wine production. This is because most of the vineyards are old, low yielding, and also on infertile soils. So very low production compared to their plantings. Very similar to the concepts of terroir in France. Right? Spaniards, when they talk about winemaking, they use the term elaborar, which is a verb which means to elaborate, which implies consciousness and time of the product. So we're not trying to rewrite the wine, we're not trying to force or manipulate it in any way. We are simply elaborating the grape and the land that it came from, right? So I think that's really cool. Also, an interesting little fun fact about Spain is one grape variety will have many different names depending on the region. So we all commonly know and love Tempranillo. That is what the biggest planted variety in Rioja, right? If you go to other parts of Spain, you'll have lots of different varieties claimed on the label. These are all actually clones of Tempranillo, right? So Tinto Fino, Sensibel, Tinto del País, which is commonly used in Ribera del Duero, and Ul de Llebre in Catalonia. These are all clones of Tempranillo, genetically speaking, but they all have kind of different names depending on where you go. So that's very fun. If you need a recap on what a grapevine clone is, you can check out this link on this slide. Okay, top regions of Spain. We're not going to have time to cover all of these areas, unfortunately, right? But we're going to talk about a number of them. So Rioja, Priorat, Ribera del Duero, Jerez, Penedès, and Rias Baixas will be some of the areas that we talk about. We tried to kind of pick and choose some regions known for different varieties of different climates to kind of give you kind of a sampler of some of Spain's major regions. But of course, if you find this a super interesting country and want to learn more, I highly encourage you to do some research, read through the books, just Google about it, right? Always excited for you guys to learn about more regions, so I highly encourage you to do that. Okay, so we'll just jump right in with Spanish wine classifications. Here we see like a pyramid of denominations, classifications for kind of a quality tier system for Spanish wines. At the very top of this pyramid, we have Vino de Pago, VP. And we're going to have the actual definitions for these in the next slide. But Vino de Pago is the kind of the very top. It represents a very small percentage of wineries in Spain. And that's because Pago means single vineyard, right? There's also some translations towards payment. But in this case, we're talking more about a single vineyard or a single estate, right? So Vino de Pago. Then we have a DOCA, which is denomination of origin qualified, calificada, right? Then we have DO, denomination of origin, VC, vino de calidad con indicación geográfica, and then we have VT, vino de la tierra. So these are kind of like the lists going from top to bottom of denominations for Spain. We also have an article from the Wine Scholar Guild if you'd like to read more specifically. right? And then we also have here the seal for Spain, designation of origin, and then we also have the European protected geographical indication seal as well. So more on Spanish classification. So vino de pago means single vineyard. So wines must be produced from a single estate, meaning grown, produced, and bottled there entirely. So all the processes need to happen on that estate property. Then we have a DOCA, Denomination de Origin Calificada, right? So qualified denomination of origin. This is the highest level of appellation in Spain. This has, for a region to obtain this, it must be at DO status, so that one step below, for a minimum of 10 years. It also must be produced and bottled within that region. And oddly enough, wines must cost at least double the national average of DO wines to be DOCA, which is pretty crazy. This is the first time that we've seen in a designation that the price had to be involved in the designation. Also, there are currently only 2 regions that occupy this category, and that is Rioja and Priorat, which is interesting. Priorat also, interestingly enough, you'll see a DOQ, which is a qualified designation of origin on the labels. That's kind of their own labeling system for themselves as well, but they are technically a DOCA as well. Perfect. So next on that ladder, one step below, we have DO, denomination of origin. Most of Spain's wine production falls under this kind of grouping. For this, we see a lot of really similar things that we saw in like France and Italy. So the use of authorized grape varieties, your production levels, winemaking methods, aging regimen, these are all overseen, by authorities. The areas have been recognized for at least 5 years to become a DO. And then there are currently 68 DOs in Spain in total. Next, we have Vino de Calidad con Indicación Geográfica, and this is kind of like the stepping stone for DO status. So this is specifically for regions between VT and DO status. It must be a VC for 5 years before applying to become DO status. There are 7 appellations that currently hold the VC status, right? Then we have Vino de la Tierra. This is a classification of wine that indicates regional characteristics. This is also actually under PGI status for the European Union, so it is a protected geographical indication. This will have more relaxed viticultural standards, and there are currently 42 VTs in Spain, right? Then we have Vino de España, Vino, and Vino de Mesa. This is like your common table wine. It's only required to mention the country of origin, the vintage, and variety on the label. So the most laid back of all the designations, right? Cool. So hopefully that kind of makes sense for the classification systems and the requirements that come along with that. Feel free to check out that article linked with the pyramid if you'd like to really dive deeper into that. So now we'll kind of go into some of the major winemaking regions of Spain, talk about the varieties that are produced and kind of their styles as we go. So Rioja is definitely Spain's most famous winemaking region. It's, we all kind of refer to like Rioja blends, Rioja wines, right? Tempranillo is the most highly planted variety in that region, of course, and it's the dominant variety for all the blends as well. These wines are aged longer before release than most other wines in the world, which is pretty crazy. So the aging requirements and stylistic preferences are quite intense, right? Generally speaking, there are 2 styles of Rioja wines. There is the traditional, and then there's a modern Alta expression. Traditionally, wines from Rioja are aged for a long time in American oak barrels. Traditionally, the oak was purchased from America, and then they would cooper and put together the barrels in Spain, which is really interesting. They also have the belief that older American oak barrels matured the best wines. It's said to impart softer, more integrated characters. From what we know from winemaking today, and I'm sure they knew too back then, the more times that you use a barrel, the longer you use it for aging, the less oak flavor it impacts into the wine. So going back to their philosophy of elaborar, to elaborate what the grape itself was saying, it really makes sense that they'd prefer a more neutral oak barrel for their wines, because the characteristics would be more subtle. It would be mostly the grape and the land being expressed as the wine ages in those barrels. So that's a very interesting take, especially when you think about today, wines being made in Napa, or just like, or in other parts of California too, Napa, Paso Robles, I'm sure there's many others too, where we're just getting hit with new French oak everywhere you go, are spending thousands, tens of thousands of dollars on these barrels. And here we have a region that specifically is calling out to use for older barrels, which I think is really interesting, right? Then on the other side of that traditional style, right, now we have the modern Alta expression, which might have been inspired by American winemakers. I don't know for sure. Don't credit me on that. But this is wines aged for a shorter amount of time in brand new French oak barrels. So, interesting perspective on that. There are many varieties of Rioja. The big ones are Tempranillo, Garnacha, Graciano, Maturana Tinta, and Mazuelo. Garnacha is just genetically the same to Grenache. It's traced back, they're genetically the same, and they're grown in both regions, right? Next, we have Garnacha Blanca and Tempranillo Blanco. These are most likely clones of the red varieties that have produced a white skin tone instead of a red, right? But very interesting. Okay, there's also there's a designation system for quality, but there's also a classification system for aging, specifically for Rioja, which is really interesting. And bodegas, also known as wineries, are not legally required to use this aging system, but it is still extremely useful for shoppers, right? So the very baseline of aging requirements, this is just called a Rioja right here at the bottom. And this means low or no oak, 1 to 2 years of aging, right? And this is a less expensive range of wine from Rioja. Don't credit these prices because this was created back in 2013. This image specifically, I'm sure prices have raised since then. Next on the aging classification system, we have Crianza. This is required 1 year in oak and 1 year in bottle. Then we have Reserva, which is 1 year in oak, 2 years in bottle. And then Gran Reserva, which is 2 years in oak and 3 years in bottle. These are typically the most expensive out of all the aged wines. So, like I said, wineries are not required to use this system, but if you really want to get into Rioja wines and you want to learn more, this is something that can help you with your labels. Okay, so we're going to move over from Rioja over to Catalonia. Catalonia is on the northeastern part of Spain, touching up against France, which is a very beautiful region. Catalonia is a very proud autonomous community in northeast Spain, and it actually has its own language called Catalan. Their capital is Barcelona. Very beautiful area, like I said, and lots of winemaking regions within Catalonia, but today we're going to focus on Penedès and Priorat, right? So I have these marked out on the map for you guys. So Penedès is this light purple region just east of Barcelona. Priorat is just a farther east and more south of Catalonia. So we'll talk about those today. Oh yeah, and then here's the Catalonia flag as well, which is really cool. Okay, Catalonia, very interesting area. Multiple wine regions, right? We're going to focus on Penedès and Priorat. Penedès is the top region for cava sparkling winemaking, which is really fun. We're going to talk about that more in a second. Priorat, Penedès is a DO. Priorat is the DOCA, also labeled as DOQ in Catalonia. We have lots of big reds from Priorat. I'll put that in the slide after I record. Catalonia is long considered one of the best wine regions in Spain after Rioja, so very popular, very famous. 95% of all of cava comes from Penedès, specifically in Catalonia. And this region also holds a phylloxera festival every year, which I thought was really interesting. This is called Festa de la Phylloxera. It's to celebrate and kind of remember a very like tragic time in the world of winemaking, but specifically for Catalonia, this is when they were able to transform their winemaking region and then become famous for it, essentially. So we'll talk about this in just a moment. Next slide. But we do have the article listed right here from Wine Enthusiast. If you'd like to do a deeper dive, it's a really interesting read. Okay, so a little background on phylloxera and the birth of cava. So in the late 1800s, phylloxera it still exists, this louse that devastated all the vineyards around the world, right? So started in the United States with travel and, transporting plants and planting them in new places and, just kind of cross contamination of things across the world, right? Phylloxera just went from soil to soil as people traveled more, and it just devastated vineyards. We have discovered that American grapevines are resistant to phylloxera, so that's why a lot of these vineyards had to replant with American rootstocks and then start all over again, right? So there was this huge outbreak of phylloxera in the 1800s. No one was safe, right? For Catalonia specifically, by 1893, about 90% of their vines were destroyed. So at the time, red grape varieties were the most common in Catalonia. Then a group of people came together called the Seven Sages. I think these were just like town wise elders, right? You'll have to read the article to get more information. So they promote grafting European vines onto resistant American rootstock, right? But then they also had taken this time to redirect, and they said, you know what? We're going to focus on planting ancient white varieties to our region, right? So that includes Xarello, Macabeo, Perialda, and we're just going to change it up completely. We're not going to plant what we used to. We're just going to change our focus and just see what happens, right? So with that, by the time 1872 rolled around, we have Josep Raventos, and he is a multi-generational grape grower and wine producer. He actually created Spain's first sparkling wine, and Sant Sadurní de Anoia, which is now the capital of cava, basically. Okay, so with this gentleman, Josep Raventos, before he did this, he took a trip to France and then learned about champagne and then brought it back home, basically, right? So they adopted the traditional method with a bottle fermentation, just like they make champagne, right? So he's credited for pioneering sparkling wine. Fast forward to the early 1900s, it just spreads across the country, becomes very popular. Spanish royalty recognize it, they serve it at royal events, including like very important events like coronations. And then it wasn't until 1959 that the term or the designation cava became officially recognized as a governing designation name for the product, right? Previously, it was just called Spanish champagne, right? But we wanted to differ from that and have our own image. So cava actually is a reference where that name comes from. It means cave or cellar, which is a reference to where that secondary fermentation happened for traditional sparkling wines, right? So that's where cava comes from. And then still today, 95% of cava is still made in Catalonia, and it is internationally respected. I will say the fun thing about cava is that it's made in the traditional method, just like champagne is made. There's designations for aging, there's designations for sweetness levels. Read into that Wine Enthusiast article if you want to learn more. But oftentimes, it's a fraction of the price that champagne is. So whether you prefer champagne or cava, they're going to taste different because they're made with different grape varieties, right? However, for the price, oftentimes we see some people shifting towards cava for a purchase option, which is really interesting. Okay, so within Catalonia, still, we have Priorat, which is a reference to a priory, right? So it's tiny but mighty region. This is one of the two DOCs in Spain, right after Rioja. So we have something in this region called the Stairway to Heaven, which goes back to the Middle Ages. Alfonso II of Aragon founded a Carthusian monastery called Scala Dei, which means God's Stairway. The monastery is now abandoned, but a local winery came into the building and operates in parts of it, and they created a business, Cellars de Scala Dei, which is, winery of God's Stairway, which is really cool. The varieties for this region are typically Garnacha and Cariñena, which is Grenache and Carignan. The wines can be really tight and need a lot of aging, but the wines from this region are outstanding after that aging time and go for a nice price tag. We're not talking about necessarily the same prices that you see in France for some high quality French imported wines, but expensive for Spain for sure, right? So it's still a pretty high price tag, but not as obscene as some of that I have seen before, right? Typical characters of wines made from this region, according to wine professionals online, are dried fig, licorice, jammy notes, and even soy sauce, which I thought was really interesting. So that is a little bit about Priorat. Okay, so now moving out of Catalonia, moving back across to the western side, we have Ribera del Duero. And Duero might ring a bell because we're talking about the Douro River that also goes through Portugal as well, right? So this is a classified DO. It actually has a higher elevation than Rioja and lots of limestone and clay soils. They also have diurnal temperature shifts, so hot days and cool nights. The hot days help to promote the accumulation of sugars, right? So they start to ripen. Cold nights allow the plants to shut down and preserve natural acids, which is very helpful for the ratios for a high quality wine. It is said that the Tempranillo produced in this region is more concentrated. Typically there's more tannins, more intensity, and from a smaller berry size, right? Major varieties of this region that you'll find are Tinto Fino or Tinto del País, which are clones of Tempranillo. Okay, moving south, we have Jerez. This is another DO region in Spain. They're very famous for their tapas and sherry. It's a protected name, just like champagne. So tapas are small bites, little nibbles in the late morning. It's typically after breakfast coffee, but before lunch. Lunch is actually served around 3 p.m. in Spain, so much different than what we're used to here in the United States. A lot of countries actually have very late lunches and very late dinners. So it's definitely a different perspective than the 9 to 5 that we see here in the U.S., right? Also, an interesting thing is sherry is typically served cold. Manzanilla and Fino are served very cold. In southern Spain, they serve cream sherry over ice with a twist of orange. So there's lots of different types of sherry wines, right? Like we kind of mentioned, Manzanilla, Fino, cream. There's many different types. In general, sherry wine is a white wine that's fortified with grape spirits. Alcohol ranges from 15 to 22%, and they can actually be sweet or dry. Most sherries will utilize a floor yeast. This is a yeast that consumes oxygen and ethanol to create a nutty caramel smell in the wine. The floor yeast can actually be seen here in this picture in the upper right in this barrel. It's like this layer of white film on top of the wine. This is where it forms because it needs to consume oxygen, right? So it's not actually really suspended in the wine. It just kind of sits on the top as a layer. We try to prevent this in normal winemaking because we try not to create that sherry flavor in our standard wines. But for sherry specifically, this is a process that's utilized to create those flavors, right? Sherry is also made primarily from a grape variety called Palomino Fino, but sometimes it's also made with Pedro Jimenez or Moscatel, which are both very nice, right? Ultimately, there are 7 different styles of sherry. There's Manzanilla, Fino, Amontillado, Palo Cortado, Oloroso, Cream, and Pedro Jimenez. Interestingly enough, Oloroso means like very aromatic, like very smelly. So if you like really like intense smelling wines, check out the Oloroso. Amontillado is very fun too, because if you are a fan of Edgar Allan Poe and his Cask of Amontillado story, that's kind of a fun gothic short story that you can enjoy a glass that was referenced in that story. So check out Wine Bible page 462 for more information on those styles if you would like. You can find just about all of them at Total Wine. They're all available, and there's dry ones and sweet ones as well. And also, this is a wine that traditionally it's okay to mix things with, just like we said up here. The cream sherry over ice with a twist of orange. It's totally okay to serve this style wine that way, right? Typically, you'd be very scolded for putting ice in wine, but it just depends. Just depends the style and what region and country you're enjoying it in, right? Okay. Now we're going to move over to the very, very west coast of Spain, right above Portugal. This is Rias Baixas. Rias Baixas is super interesting because this is a really humid, wet, maritime climate for Spain, and they're famous for their white wines, interestingly enough. And the reason that they can get by with producing wines in this region is they actually utilize a different training system for their grapevines called pergola trellising. This helps the vines to grow upwards, up really, really tall. Then they have the shoots growing up above, creating kind of like a canopy or roof kind of system above your head. This is called pergola. This helps to allow airflow underneath and above the vines to prevent mold from forming. So keeping really good airflow despite the wet or potentially humid areas, right? There's lots of estuaries here. Lots of beautiful diversity of life in all ecosystems. It's a really beautiful area to visit, but it's very fun. The top variety of this region is Albarino. It's a beautifully crisp, refreshing white wine, some tropical notes, some minerality, maybe even potentially like a slight effervescence. If you get a chance to go to Edio Vineyards locally here in the Sierra Foothills, they make one of the best Albarinos I've had in a very long time. But it's a very beautiful, refreshing white grape variety. Okay, then we have our review questions and student learning objectives. Take a look at this before we take the quiz. Of course, if you have any questions, send me an email. I hope this was fun and interesting for you. Definitely reach out. Look into new things if you have any questions. I always encourage you guys to learn more. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.